Hi there, this is David Roach, Quantum Economics and Independent Strategy. Wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you're at, hello. Now, we're going to talk today about the German election. We already talked about that on a video which was entitled Germany, an election that changes Europe. But there are some things that need to be cleared up, and I need to revisit again the question of what the significance is this for Europe. And people have asked quite a lot, actually, how German elections actually work and what the delays and how constitutional governments are put together in a coalition and so on. So I will touch on each of these subjects. Now, first of all, let me tell you where we are. Actually, since 3 weeks ago, the polls have moved very little. The CDU, CSU are at about 21.86% on average of all the polls so far, which is up about 1.86% from where they were, but still very, very weak considering where they used to be in the old days. And the SPD, which is the party which had the biggest meteoric rise in its fortune, is at 25.6%. Which is extraordinary, and Bundes die Grüne, which are the Greens, are at 16%, down from 17%, with the FDP, which is possibly the kingmaker in any coalition, at 11.17%. Then there is the all possible inclusion of Die Linke, which is at 6.29%, which are the ex-East German communists. But they want Germany to leave NATO, even though they've softened their stance, and it's unlikely that either the SPD and certainly not the CDU would ever envisage going into a coalition with them. But it is not impossible. And then way behind that, you have the racists, the AfD, which are really going nowhere, down again to 11% from 12%, and other bits and pieces which are at 8%. Now, what that actually tells us is the following. It tells us that the most likely next ruling coalition of Germany is going to be the SPD, with Olaf Scholz as the chancellor, in bed with, well, not, of course, I don't really mean that in any politically incorrect sense, but together with Annalena Baerbock's Green Party, and then you have to have a third party. And I think that will be the FDP, the Liberals, which have been making all sorts of rather arrogant noises, which of course are inspired by the fact that they think that they are going to be the kingmakers, which indeed will be the case unless the coalition of the Red and Greens choose to align themselves and to include Die Linke in their government, which I think is pretty unlikely. But it could happen. It would have a slight bearing on fiscal policy, but probably not a lot. So that's what we're going to get. Now, people say, well, how do we actually get there? Well, the German electoral system is quite complex. People get 2 votes, all right? Now, there are 598 members of the Bundestag who are being elected. With those votes in every constituency, the candidate who gets the most vote gets a seat in the Bundestag. So essentially, you have a first past the post system. But 50% of the seats in the Bundestag are filled by the second vote. In other words, if a party in the second vote gets 50% or 20% of the votes, then that party will get 50 or 20% of the seats in the Bundestag. 50, half, or 20%, a fifth of the 598 members. If that party did not get enough candidates elected in the first past the post vote, then it can appoint other candidates which did not get elected, or who did not get elected to the Bundestag to fill its quota. And that is a very particular system in Europe. So you have two constituents of how you get to forming a government in Germany or how you run the election. Number one, in each constituency, first past the post, winner takes all. And then the percentage of the national vote, which is your second vote as a German citizen. And the percentage of that vote actually sets the percentage of seats in the 598 member Bundestag that you get as a party. And if you don't get enough people elected directly by the first past the post system, and you get more votes in the national vote, the second vote, then you're allowed to top up the number of representatives you have in the Bundestag until they represent a percentage of all the seats in the Bundestag equal to your party's percentage share of the national vote. Okay, you got that? Well, there you are. Now, once that is done, which will emerge in the days rather than the hours, though we will have indications of the outcome on September the 26th, when the vote is, then the itsy bitsy, and it is indeed itsy and bitsy, but rather big bitsy, of forming a German government starts. Now, that can take, it can take up to a year or 5 months, but the average period is 2 to 3 months. And that is most likely going to be the time that it takes before we actually know what the constituent, what the program and the makeup of the next ruling coalition in Germany is. Okay, now, the Germans negotiate coalitions in a very echt ernst, very serious sort of way. It's not like in my country, Ireland, where coalitions, you know, they're formed up, they all disagree, they fall to bits, you get another government, you might have an election, you might not, or you might just get another coalition. In Germany, it doesn't work like that at all, at all, at all. What happens is that a document is written outlining the program proposed by each party. That's submitted to all the parties. It's usually between 20 and 50 pages, but it is deemed to be a Kurz document, a short document, though it's not that short. The parties then look at these papers and decide whether there is enough in common to negotiate. Then, presumably there is, or there will at some point be enough to negotiate between the parties I have mentioned. They will sit down and they will negotiate. The result of that negotiation is a document which sets out the program of government, and it is a legally binding document. And it is usually hundreds and hundreds of pages long. And it actually is a guarantee that what is written down, what is agreed, is what you as a voter are going to get. And it avoids a huge amount of instability. So that's how the German electoral system works. Now, what does it actually mean? Well, here, in a sense, I'm recapping what I said in our earlier video, which is available, of course, on this site. The first thing is this will not throw German fiscal conservatism to the winds, even if the Linke are included in the government, which I don't think they will be. But let us assume that the government was made up of the SPD, the Social Democrats and the Greens, and then the FDP, the Liberals. I think you would not see caution thrown to the wind, but you would see changes. In other words, the Schuldbremse, the debt brake, and the Schwarze Null, which is the zero deficit budget constraints, would be loosened over time, but they would be actually got around by having a pretty large, say, between 1 to 1.5% of GDP annually investment programs funded outside the budget. In other words, the budget deficit program, current spending minus tax, et cetera, that would remain under the Schuldbremse and the Schwarze Null policies. They're not going to throw those out of the window. though frankly, one is so far away from them, it's hardly realistic. But nevertheless, figuratively, they'll still be there. But the actual fiscal spending program will look to make Germany a lot greener, to raise its appalling level of connectivity, which lags practically every country in Europe at a household level. And of course, to renew its creaking infrastructure, where the famed Autobahn are full of holes, and the state railway seems to run perpetually late and perpetually break down. So there's plenty of stuff to be done. But it doesn't stop there. Germany will spend more money. That will reduce its savings rate. That reduces one of the great imbalances in Europe, whereby if you spend too little, if your savings are constantly in excess, as they are in Germany, in excess of your investment requirements, your current account remains in large surplus, and you actually are a brake on European growth. So a better balance between investment and saving would be a growth booster for the whole of the European Union. That's important. The second thing is that Germany will act in support of the new generation funds, which are sponsored and agreed by all the member states, and which are currently being implemented throughout the European Union, but are having a particularly big effect in countries like Italy under Draghi, where the growth rate is likely to be something like 5 to 6% next year, unprecedented almost in my lifetime in Italy, but also in Spain and Greece and so on, and indeed all the European members. And these funds, which are oriented towards the environment and towards the high technology capability of the economies, they are having an inspirational effect upon confidence, with the result, for example, if you look at Italy, you're seeing a recovery in capital spending, which was, of course, the great loser out of the old Italian uncertainties and stagnation. So that's coming back. It's coming back, which tells you that the private sector is playing ball. Far from actually crowding out the private sector, the new generation initiatives by the European Union and the member states is actually crowding private sector in. That, of course, boosts growth enormously. Now, finally, the whole European integration ideal and policies to achieve it will go much further under a green socialist government than they ever would under the CDU, CSU. I mean, Merkel actually was a fine lady and very reliable, a bit like, you know, a well-loved armchair. She wasn't exactly inspirational, but she'd always be there tomorrow and be the same as today. She actually oversaw during the financial crisis, sovereign debt crisis in Europe, the greatest repatriation of shared power, that is community, European Union power to national governments in the history of the whole European Union. Now, this is going to reverse because both the Greens and the Social Democrats have a high priority on, or put a high priority on further integration in the European Union. Final chapter, there is European fiscality. Now, European government spending and revenues are supposed to be submitted to the implacable laws of the European Stability and Growth Pact. This is a nonsensical bit of arithmetic which says that a government debt to GDP, for some reason which is entirely unexplained, mystical, or rational, has to be equal to 60% of GDP in 20 years. Now, as European member states are currently well over 100%, that actually would mean they would have to have contractionary budgets, deflationary budgets, higher taxes and spending for at least the next 20 years. That is about as likely to happen as snow in the Sahara in any month, including August. So what is going to happen is that the European Growth and Stability Pact is going to have to be changed, put to bed, or it's going to have to apply simply to current spending and exclude investment spending or whatever. But in any case, in its present form, the new German government will actually push its demise. And that, I can't help thinking, is a good thing. Not that I think that fiscal spending should get out of hand as it is in the United States, but that if we are going to rationalize it and focus it, at least we should do so with rules that make some economic sense, which we do not have. So that, in a rather big nutshell, is what I would expect from the next German elections. And that is what I think is very significant for Europe. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give us a like and subscribe. Goodbye, good night, and don't turn off the lights.